Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making. We are back with another full build video. In this episode we are going to be building the 1 to 350th scale USS Gato by Hobby Boss. And to supplement this kit we do have a set of Eduard photo-etch. This is going to be a rather simple kit, as many 350th scale submarines tend to be. There's not a lot of parts, and it's going to build up rather quickly. Now, the Hobby Boss kit, this Hobby Boss kit in particular represents USS Gato as she would have appeared at the very beginning of the U.S. entry into World War II. And there are different versions of this kit that represent the submarine at different points in its service. So just to be aware, don't confuse it with later variants of this submarine. And I was able to expand on my very, very limited knowledge of World War II era submarines with this build. I had to do a little bit of research into the paint scheme for this because it's somewhat unique. Well, not necessarily unique, but it's a version of a paint scheme that wasn't in service for very long, and it really has to do with a lot of blacks and dark colors, which can be a challenge to paint. And so there was a lot that going into this that I was really excited to build this kit, but I didn't really know much about World War II submarines, USS Gato, its service history, and submarine paint schemes. As you can see here, basically construction starts with the main hull. It comes in two parts, a left half and a right half, with the main deck being part of one of the halves. Glued that together, and then there's quite a few large gaps in here, and most likely those are a result of me trimming the excess sprue gates that result in these gaps. But nevertheless, we're just going to use a little bit of super glue to fill those in, and just applying it straight on, not really being super careful on how much I get on there. I just want to make sure I'm getting those gaps filled, because the rest of it's all going to get sanded off and cleaned up later. So we're just getting this all around, basically where all the gaps are. What is nice with the main deck being part of the hull is it actually is able to hide pretty much the entire seam line along the upper side of the submarine. So you don't have to worry about like filling and sanding that. It's mainly just the seam line on the very bottom here. And so to start off, I'm using a jeweler's file to really knock down the bulk of that super glue. And obviously that's once the super glue has dried. But yeah, so the file really gets in there and knocks that down pretty quickly. And then from there, it's just a matter of wet sanding using progressively finer grits of sandpaper and sanding sponges until I'm happy with the seam line and that, and it's blended in properly. For something small like this little submarine, it doesn't really take very long to do that, so it is a rather quick process. With all the sanding done now, I can go ahead and restore lost panel lines here. Pretty simple and straightforward. I'm using this Tamiya razor saw, which is chucked into one of my hobby knife handles. This isn't my favorite saw to use, but I wanted to give it a go. The reason why I don't necessarily like it is it's pretty flimsy, and with it chucked into the knife handle, it does make it easy to bend it if you kind of get a little torque in there. So just be aware. Next up, I'm just filling in the rescribed panel lines with a little bit of Tamiya extra thin. This just helps clean up the panel lines, deburrs it, and kind of takes the edge off to help it blend in a little bit better. So with the hull taken care of now, we can start adding the rest of the details, like the prop shafts here. And I'm sure there's work that could be done to make these better and more in scale. I wasn't necessarily interested in adding a lot of scratch building to this or making a lot of modifications. This was just one of those builds where I was just really excited to build it and to get through that process. And so super detailing or making it super accurate wasn't on my radar for this build. And I think in the end I spent a grand total of about 9 days on this build, start to finish. And that's one of the fun things about these 350 scale submarines. And I talk a little bit about this when in my USS Los Angeles video as well, if you haven't seen that one yet. But these submarine builds are really quite quick builds. In fact, I think the majority of the time I spend on this is done in the painting process. The actual construction process probably only took me about a day, and most of that was just like waiting for glue to dry in between sanding sessions. And so yeah, these are fun little, I want to call it like a palette cleansing build. You know, if you've come off of a couple of large multi-week, multi-month builds and you just want to knock something out and just kind of have the pleasure of building and painting, one of these little sub kits are quite nice to do. I have been on a bit of a spending spree lately, buying sub kits and ship kits as well, just basically to have on hand when I want to fill in a couple, like a week of time with something that's just, I can kind of turn my brain off a little bit and just motor through the build. So right now we're just working on the conning tower, the sail, getting the details here. The Gato class submarine had a kind of unique looking sail compared to what like you would typically expect from like a U-boat or something. And a lot of it's enclosed, but still rather interesting. There are a number of photo etch pieces that we're going to add on here to the hull before the painting process, and then later on you'll see in the video that there's a number of photo etch pieces we're going to add after the painting process. I normally try to add as much photo etch in advance, but especially around like the conning tower, there was a lot of areas where I had to paint stuff first before I can install other things, and it was just easier to do the photo etch at a later time. This particular piece of photo etch going on to the aft end of the submarine here, I should have, in hindsight, annealed it first. It would have made dealing with the curves around the hull a lot easier, and I kind of had some trouble getting some of these parts to like fully stick down, just because the photo etch wanted to spring back into its flattened position, but I was able to get there eventually. I think one of the biggest bonuses of getting the photo etch set here is getting the photo etch prop guards for the back of the submarine here. They add a lot of cool detail to this submarine build that just isn't available in the plastic, and really kind of help elevate the overall look. These were a little tricky to get installed as well. Again, I probably should have annealed these parts first. It would have just made them a lot easier to bend and hold their shape. But live and learn. So giving you the advice here to do that, don't make the mistakes I made. So getting the parts bent down and then glued into place. The tweezers are going to be really helpful for a lot of these small photo etch parts. I definitely recommend investing in a decent pair of tweezers. It'll make your job a little bit easier. So you can see there's some additional details we've added on here that I didn't film, mainly just because they were so small and it was just kind of hard to keep in focus on the camera. The little piece going onto the front here for the front mast. One of the things that I like about the World War II submarines is just how much they are, as the name implies, an underwater boat as opposed to like a true full submersible. And I like a lot of these little details that are on these submarines, like just like these little braces for the mat, for the mast at the front there. Just kind of interesting. Next up, we're going to add some details to the deck gun. I believe this is a 3-inch deck gun, but there are some small parts that need to go on here that really help to make the deck gun look a lot better than what just the kit comes out of the kit. The kit is just a one part piece, and that's it. Not a lot of detail. So a lot of the details we're adding with photo etch are like the seats, the gunner seats, and the platforms, and then the sighting pieces, and it definitely helps make the kit look, or at least the gun look, a lot better. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to painting. With all of our construction done, we're going to go ahead and prime everything in Mr. Surfacer 1500 black and give this a nice, good, even coat. You can see here I've got a piece of wire holding the kit together, or holding the kit so that I can hold it without touching it. However, it ended up just kind of being more annoying than actually helpful. And kind of just ended up not using it very often, but you know, do whatever works for you. So this basically what I'm doing here is I'm going to prime the top half, let it dry, and then I'll come back and prime the bottom part once the top part has dried up. You can see there that I did build the included plastic stand for the kit, mainly just as a way to have somewhere to hold it while I was working on it. It was never my intention to actually use that as the final display piece. I've got something different for that later on in the video. The props are adorably tiny, so we got to get those painted, get the deck gun painted, and then finally there are parts of the photo etch that I'm going to prime as well, you know, on the photo etch fret here. And you know, removing these parts from the fret later on will result in scratches to the parts, but I just find it easier to prime them first anyways, and then just do little touch-ups later on to cover up any scratches, as opposed to trying to like hand paint or airbrush the parts separately. It's just kind of a pain, in my opinion. But I'm still relatively new to, you know, ship modeling, so maybe there are better ways to do it. And if there are, you know, tell me what are your tips down below. Let me know in the comments. So now I'm going to start the process. Kind of the first steps of weathering is to create some streaking effects using some white paint that will get layered underneath the main colors of paint for this build. And so I'm really trying to do the like vertical streaking kind of in my mind. That makes a little more sense to me with a vessel sitting in water. I pretty much used this same process when I did the Los Angeles a couple months ago, to kind of undercoat with the white in the streaking motion and trying to highlight certain areas on the build. To me, this made a little bit more sense. Now, obviously, a lot of these effects are going to be exaggerated at this scale compared to, you know, the actual full-size thing, but I think it does a good job of just conveying the nature of a vessel at sea. So next up, we're going to use some NATO black. Now, this particular measure, I forget what paint scheme it is, measured something, I forget what the paint scheme is. It was basically like everything above the waterline was black, and then the anti-fouling paint was also a special black version of anti-fouling paint, and then all of the horizontal surfaces like the deck and everything was supposed to be like a dark blue. And so we're dealing with like a lot of really dark colors here. So what I ended up deciding to do was all of the vertical surface or vertical surfaces above the waterline are done in NATO black. The deck is going to be basically like medium blue with a little bit of NATO black mixed in, just to darken it up a little bit. So that's going to be all of our horizontal surfaces, the deck, things like that. And then for the anti-fouling portion of the hull, the underside of the hull, I'm going to go with a straight black, just pure black. And hopefully this will give me variations in the overall like tones and colors, but still maintaining that pretty much overall just black look. And I feel like it was marginally successful. The weathering kind of blended things in a little bit more than I had initially anticipated, but you'll see that later on in the video. So this is the anti-fouling portion. It is getting painted straight black. Now later in the war, they changed up which paint measure they were using on submarines and went for more of a gray upper sides and things like that. And so definitely I might want to revisit the Gato later in its service when it had a little bit more colorful paint job. And you know, it'd be kind of fun to have them side by side with the different paint versions. But nevertheless, this was still a good exercise for me and good practice when dealing with, you know, kind of overall dark and black paint schemes. So here with the masking tape coming off, you can kind of see I ended up having a little bit of paint peel on that NATO black portion, so that will need to get touched up. But overall, I think the effect is pretty good. You can kind of see the difference between the pure black, the NATO black, and the dark blue there, and kind of neat looking, I think. So next up, we're going to go ahead and seal in all of our paintwork with some gloss. Now, normally this step would be preparing the model for decals. There's only 4 decals on this entire model, so I mean, not necessarily a huge step, but then the next step after that would be doing washes and weathering. So there is always that. But again, because we're going over such a dark paint scheme, my typical process of doing a pin wash with the dark brown wash for green vehicles doesn't really apply here. I did decide kind of last minute that I wanted to add a little bit of like wear to the deck and have a little bit of that like teak deck, peeking through the paint here. So I'm just getting the deck with a little bit of a dry brush with this Iraqi sand color. And fortunately, there is a good texture on the model here to represent the wooden deck, and so the dry brushing can kind of allow some of that to show through. And I kind of thought like, well, maybe the wear would be heaviest around the deck gun, where crew would be moving around in preparation to use the deck gun, ammunition handling, things like that. But nothing too extreme there. The Gato wearing this paint didn't wear this paint scheme for very long, and so it was never my intention to go super heavy with the weathering on this, just because realistically it wouldn't have had that. It would have come back into dry dock fairly quickly, get a new paint job, things like that. So it really wouldn't have been out long enough to really heavily weather, but I wanted to show at least a little bit. At this point, we can get the conning tower installed, and it definitely now starting to look like a submarine. And then we can go ahead and move on to decals. Like I mentioned, there's only 4 decals on this entire kit, 2 on the sail, 2 on the front hull of the ship's numbers. And there are a few reference pictures of the Gato early in its service, and it looks like, and you ship guys correct me if I'm wrong here, but it looks like pretty quickly after being out to sea, the crew painted over the white numbering with black paint to basically to tone it down or hide it, or not make it such like an obvious, here's a sneaky dark submarine with massive bright white letters. So what I ended up doing was applying the decals. I found the reference pictures and I was like, oh, I should probably tone those down, and I'm going to go ahead and paint over the decals. So I'm just using a pure black color, which should stand out a little bit from the NATO black hull to represent the crew painting over the ship's numbers here. And it's a little crude, but in the end, I kind of like the effect, and it's on the finished model, it's actually kind of subtle, and I think it kind of works. Again, it does make for a rather dark and monotonous looking ship model, but it is what it is. So I'm just using some Vallejo black paint there. Now, I mentioned before that there was some photo etch that I was leaving off until after the paintwork was done, and most of that photo etch is on the conning tower here. There's a lot of parts that were like photo etch parts that were bridging the gap between one part of plastic to another part that I had to paint separately, so that's why I've waited to do this. And it's kind of tricky. You can see here that I'm kind of fumbling around and trying to get these parts, these very, very tiny parts installed kind of inside of the plastic parts. And it does require patience, and it does require a little bit of trial and error. It's not perfect, but I wasn't necessarily like trying to build this kit to win any awards, just rather just having fun with it and trying to maintain my stress levels a little bit. So getting some of the railing attached up here. I always love putting railing on a ship model, just because I feel like the railing always takes it from, oh yeah, it's a plastic toy, to, okay, this is serious looking model represented in scale, and I just love how it transforms the look of a model. There were a few other little photo etch pieces that go on to the sail that I didn't film just because they were really small and annoying, but you can kind of see just all the little antennas and things sticking out the sides and out of the top there. A lot of neat detail. You do have to pre-bend some of the railing that goes onto the main deck here to kind of work around that flared area of the deck. So that just kind of requires you know, holding the part up to the model, identifying where your bends are going to be, and then just using the tweezers to bend them. You could use like a bending jig if you had one, photo etch bending jig. I found the tweezers were enough here, and pretty straightforward. You can see here I ended up getting a rather large glob of super glue on the deck there. That's going to require cleanup and touch up. The rest of the railing pretty much got installed without any fuss. It's pretty straightforward, and there's not a lot of it. It's not like a much larger ship that has multiple layers of railing and decks and things like that. It's all just the one main deck, and pretty much just a continuous wraparound, as it were. There are a couple little gaps, but nothing too bad. So, yep, just getting that all installed with the super glue and the tweezers. There we go. All the railing installed. Like I said, I love the look of how it turns out with the railing. So doing a little bit of touch-up paint here where the railing was scratched, and you could see some of the exposed brass underneath. And then finally we can go ahead and matte varnish everything here. So this is going to seal in all of our decals, all of our work, all that stuff, and make it uniform. This will also, help to clear up any of the excess glue blobs and stuff. Those will kind of disappear under the matte coat, and get the decals more blended in now. So everything gets a matte coat, top to bottom. And I actually went over this twice. I wanted to make sure there was a good solid barrier here before I started the next process, which is going to be weathering. And I just wanted to make sure there was plenty of varnish on there. Get the deck gun installed, and now we can move on to weathering. So for the weathering, like I mentioned before, I didn't necessarily want to do a lot of very heavy weathering on this, but I do want some signs of wear and some signs of use that this thing is out at sea. And so we're going to start with basically like a pure black pin wash, and this is just I'm adding this into areas where there's excessive recesses, panel lines, areas where I can help create a little bit of contrast between detail and the surface. So the deck gets it, all the little details get the black wash. Now this is pretty thin, and once it dries, it largely disappears, but just still adds just a tiny layer of depth and contrast to some of these parts. And so we're going to go ahead and get this installed pretty much all over the entire submarine. And here you can see I've actually got, at the time, brand new model stand. This is from War Dog Modeling. I'll leave a link to their website down below. But this is a great little painting stand, model stand, and was really, really nice to use for working on the submarine. Even though I got it pretty late in the build, definitely a huge help here. So for the main weathering, we're going to be using oil paints, and so I'm giving everything a nice layer of the odorless mineral spirits, and we're going to start layering on some paint. So I've mixed up kind of like a dark gray paint here, and we're just going to apply this mainly around the panel line area. We apply it straight onto our thinner, the mineral spirits here, and then with a large brush that's loaded, we're going to start blending that in, and you kind of working that in. Again, don't want it to be heavy, but want it to be noticeable. So working in with the loaded brush really helps, and I'll alternate between having paint on the brush and then the thinner brush, and kind of like add little spot checks of it to kind of work through that process here. And what I like about using oils is you can do it in layers. So right now I'm applying the gray, and then I can let that dry, which doesn't necessarily take very long. You can have it dry in a couple hours by air drying it, or you can hit it with like an hair dryer and dry it a little bit quicker. And then we can go in on top of that with a different layer and kind of build things up. So that's the gray layer done. And now we'll move on. And I did add, in between layers, I did add little spots of like brown. And now I'm going to do some of this light green color to represent some sea growth. basically along where the water line would be when the ship's on the surface. So we're just dabbing it on, and just like with the gray, we apply it over thinner, and then we use a thinner brush loaded with thinner to start blending that in, and to get that looking, again, subtle but noticeable. It's kind of what I'm going for here. And it takes a couple of applications and blending passes to get it to a point where I am happy with it. It would be interesting to do a version of the submarine later in the war when it's been out on longer patrols to really have fun with the weathering, especially over a much lighter color like gray. Would be a lot of fun to play with. So again, I definitely think I'm going to revisit this kit as it would have appeared later on in the war. Next up, we're going to do the props. Now, I know a lot of you are probably going to tell me like, oh, the props were never really that shiny, and that's true. 100% agree. I just really like the look of having like the brass props, especially standing out against the overall dark vessel. I think it looks really good. And for this, I'm using this probably 20-year-old bottle of Model Master brass enamel paint. I really don't do enamel paints all that often, or pretty much hardly ever at all, with this one exception. I think this Model Master paint is some of the best brass paint I've ever used. And the fact that the bottle's lasted me well over 20 years is pretty awesome, and it's mainly full. I mean, I don't use it very often, so kind of a nice thing to have. So there we go, props getting installed, and the fit here wasn't, I mean, it was a little tricky, but last thing to do, get rid of that ugly plastic stand the kit provides. And I designed and 3D printed my own. I wanted something with a little bit more presence, a little bit beefier, and that wouldn't necessarily tip over in a slight breeze. So, yep, there we go. The USS Gato is complete. If you've managed to make it this far, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all your support on this channel. This was a fun little diversion from some of the more rigorous projects I've been working on, and I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot from it. An all-black paint scheme is tricky and difficult to make look good. I think I got pretty close, but I'd love to hear your feedback down in the comments below. What do you guys think? Yeah, this is definitely not going to be the last submarine I do. I'm really enjoying doing submarines. They're just a lot of fun. And just ships in general. I really enjoy doing ships. So yeah, anyways, thank you for watching. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing. Every new subscriber really helps the channel and helps us to grow. Finally, I'd also like to thank my patrons for supporting this channel. If you like the content, if you like what I'm doing, and you want to help support it further, please consider joining my Patreon. You do get a couple of neat perks, like getting videos early before YouTube. You get videos ad-free, as well as you get almost real-time updates from my workbench, and some exclusive how-tos and discussion videos as well. So thank you to my patrons. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you to all for supporting my work, supporting this channel, and we will see you all on the next video. Hope you're all doing well, and see you around. Bye, everyone.